Alright, so I want to talk about a few other things that I think would be things that could be encompassed. That could be encompassed by philosophy. So I want to talk about some people think we're talking about philosophy and religion, but other rational explanations. So this is a different category of rational explanations. So some people think that actually the Bible is evidence of extraterrestrials, aliens, and they say, well, look at the incidences where they describe angels, and they say like there's a light, and they say it's like a UFO light, and the angel actually is an alien extraterrestrial probably, and they point out that the angels in the Bible don't have wings and halos. They're not described this way. First off, when the people see the angels, they're usually extremely scared, and they bow down, prostrate themselves, and the angels are described as looking just like human beings. Or, basically like human beings, so they think, oh, maybe it's extraterrestrials, aliens from another planet, They say ETs kind of look like human beings. This is what it must be. This is one rational explanation for what's going on. And they say, yeah, God actually is an extraterrestrial. And, he must be the head extraterrestrial of some other, extraterrestrial planet, whatever. And they think that they are getting somewhere with that. The thing about that is, I just want to say that it's kind of funny because they think that they've come up with some new theory that's going to make things easier. Well, I look at the Occam's razor, the simplest explanation. It's the best explanation. And I call this what the people who say aliens are responsible for a lot of things. I call this the alien paradox. And what I mean by this is they think they're making things simpler. They think, well, I'm making things simpler, I'm making things make sense, and the world now, everything fits in place. There must be an extraterrestrial, and the extraterrestrials came down and they, helped along human evolution, and they go on and on and on. But in their attempt to make things simpler, in their attempt to make sense of the world, they make things so much more complex. So then they have to describe, okay, where did these extraterrestrials come from? And then they have to describe, well, how did that happen? And, where did they come from? And then, where did that come from? And this come from? And it just creates an infinite regress. It makes things even more complicated, and it makes things actually make less sense. So this is in response to the rational explanation of aliens. I think that what I've been discussing, everything just fits the form. Even extraterrestrial stuff, these sightings and stuff, they all fit or most of them fit the form. The form is trying to be shown in all things. Hopefully, can express that later. So we have that rational explanation of what's going on in religion. Another one is that maybe it's future time travelers. So there's, they say maybe people in the future are kind of like gods, and they can travel back in time. And some people say that the Merkaba is a device that is a time-traveling device. The Merkaba, with the 4x4x4 heads and everything's 4x4 within this vehicle. They say that perhaps this is a vehicle used by people from the future coming back in time and influencing events in the past. And these things were written about. And they say that the Merkaba has not only been seen by the Jewish people, but through cultures throughout the world. The same type of thing has been described. So they say, perhaps it's future time travelers coming back in time, and they're interpreted as angels and gods and stuff like that. Another interesting thing about the Merkaba is, and I don't want to get into it too much, but there's a guy named Nassim Haramein. I forget his name exactly, but I think that's his name. He talks about how you can get the tree of life. If you want to look this up, see what I mean, then you just look up the tree of life and how you can mix this up to create ultimately the double star tetrahedron, which is called the Merkaba. And the double star tetrahedron can go back in time. Some people think, and they think that this is the vehicle of future time travelers. this explanation would avoid the infinite regress of the aliens. It is a simpler explanation than the alien paradox. But ultimately, like I was saying, it does appear that everything just fits the form. I've been studying for about 4 years. Everything really does seem to fit the form, or at least the form seems to be always trying to show itself. The quadrant, the cross. Let's see. So, talking about philosophy, let's get some light on here. It's pretty dark. I don't know where the light is. Alright, well, also I want to say though, to anybody who's met me for the last 2 years, I've been going through hard times. And people who know me from before, they recognize that although I know the true theory of everything, I'm not happy. Alright, I'm not necessarily happy. Okay, let's continue. So we're talking about philosophy. One thing I want to talk about is Kant. A big thing in philosophy you learn in a lot of big philosophy classes is about Kant, and he talks about the 4 types of knowledge that you can have. He says that there is synthetic, or I'll tell you the 2 dichotomies. There is analytic and synthetic as one dichotomy, and a priori and a posteriori. This is another dichotomy. It's very hard to see because there's no light. What the heck? And so the difference between synthetic and analytic is analytic means that it is true by definition, and synthetic means that it is not true by definition. So the difference between a posteriori and a priori means it's true. You have to experience it for it to be true, and a priori means you don't have to experience it for it to be true. So these are the types of knowledge. The types of knowledge are by mixing up these 2 dichotomies. Once again, you get the quadrant. You have analytic, a priori, synthetic, a priori, synthetic, a posteriori, and analytic, a posteriori. Analytic, a posteriori. So this should be synthetic, a priori. Okay. So Kant said that analytic a priori, an example of this would be that bachelors are married. So the definition of bachelor is that, bachelors are not married. So the definition of bachelor is that a bachelor is somebody who is not married. So it's analytic. Just if I say the bachelor is unmarried, this is analytic a priori knowledge, because you already know by the definition that this is the analytic part. By definition, it's true that all bachelors are unmarried. So just the name, you already know that's true just by definition. And a priori, do you have to experience this in order for it to be true? No. Just the definition of bachelor is that it's unmarried, and you don't have to experience this. You don't have to meet any bachelors to know this. You just know this by definition. You don't have to experience it. So this is analytic a priori knowledge. Synthetic a priori knowledge is, he said that, so this synthetic means that it's not true by definition, and a priori means you don't have to experience it for it to be true. So concept, this would be like mathematics. So he says, an example would be 7 plus 5 equals 12. He says, you never have to experience anything to tell you that 7 plus 5 equals 12. You don't have to experience 7 rocks and 5 rocks and put them together and then get 12 rocks. He says that this doesn't require experience. This can be abstracted just by the rules of mathematics. You don't have to experience it for it to be true. So that's the a priori part. You don't have to experience it. The synthetic part is, it's not true by definition. He says that there's nothing inherent within the number 7, the symbol of plus, and the number 5 that would tell you that it equals 12. So this is an example of synthetic a priori knowledge, he says. And then there is synthetic a posteriori. So this is something that has to be experienced, and it is something that is not true by definition. So let me look up one that would be that. So there is a rabbit on my porch. He says that this is synthetic a posteriori because, you have to experience this for it to be true. You don't know if there's a rabbit on your porch. You have to sense it. You have to experience it in order to know that this is true. And there's, the a priori part. Does this exist? Is this true by definition? No. There's nothing inherent in the word rabbit that means it has to be on your porch. There's nothing in the word porch that means that there has to be a rabbit on it. This is synthetic a posteriori knowledge. Okay, and then analytic a posteriori concept, that this one, there's no such thing. But there is some philosophers nowadays that actually say that everything is analytic a posteriori. So remember, the fourth doesn't seem to belong, but actually the fourth encompasses all of them. So just one argument that I've heard to say this, that analytic a posteriori is everything, is just looking at the world of forms. We have so according to the world of forms, by Plato says that there's a world, that this world is just a reflection of this perfect world of forms. So according to this, everything that exists has to be the way it is. So it's kind of difficult to explain why analytic a posteriori is true for everything, but everything that exists has to be the way it is. Everything that exists is the way it is. He says that it's difficult to explain. I don't know why the philosophers say necessarily that the fourth has to be, actually is everything. But okay, so everything exists, comes from the world of forms. It has to be this way, so it's everything is true by definition. That's why it's analytic. And a posteriori, you have to experience it for it to be true, though. So the idea that it's true, it exists in the world of forms, it has to be this way, but in order for it to exist, you have to experience it. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's difficult to explain, but I want to just say that you can see the pattern once again. The fourth doesn't seem to belong, but philosophers say that it actually encompasses the previous three. We have the four operators, plus, minus, multiplication and division and math. I just remembered that because I talked about the 7 plus 5 equals 12. It reminded me of that. Fitting the quadrant model again. What else do I want to talk about in philosophy? Okay, so we have the Platonic solids. So let's go to Plato. Or even let's go to Plato. Let's go to the pre-Socratics. So there's the pre-Socratic philosophers. There was Plato, Aristotle, and then there was the Hellenistic philosophers. So that's the way that this ancient philosophy is divided, usually taking the quadrant. According to, well, remember they worship the Tetrachist. The Pythagoreans worship the Tetrachist, kind of like the Jews worship the Tetragrammaton. The Tetrachist was the tessellation of this triangle with the 4 triangles. They also worship the symbol where you have the 4 rows of dots making 10 dots. But the 4 rows. And what else do I want to say? Oh, an interesting thing though is the pre-Socratics. A lot of people look at them as Greeks, but they were Ionian Greeks, so they were actually kind of in where Greece was, but also Middle Eastern. So Middle Eastern and Greece kind of encompassed the pre-Socratic philosophers. Socrates and Plato, I think, were Athenians in Greece. So we have Plato, and these guys said that there were 4 elements. The elements were air, water, earth, and fire. And then they also said that there was the ether. Now, every culture has had the 4 elements and the possible 5th. So, for instance, I think it was Japanese had the 4 elements, but they had the 5th as gold. And then some cultures have the 5th as void. The Native Americans said that the 5th was, I think they said it was ether. Oh, I think that maybe the 5th was life in the Greek culture. I forget. But basically, the 5th is kind of different in different cultures, but they all have the 4 elements. So the way that they come up with these 4 elements is they said that there's 4 qualities. There is hot and cold and wet and dry. So once again, we have 2 dichotomies and 4 qualities. And by mixing these up, you get 4 possibilities. So they said that air is wet and hot. So what do they mean by hot? Hot means that, well, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's not necessarily cold. I don't remember exactly what their definition of hot was, but I think about it. I think air can sometimes be cold, but the way they see it, air is a hot thing. Think about it. They were in kind of a warmer climate too. But yeah, air is hot. And the way I see hot, this relates back to the quadrant model. Air would be the idealists. Hot is kind of the intuitive part. It's the weird part. People, yeah, it's just look at it this way. It's the first quadrant type of thing. So we have hot and wet. So wet means it adheres to its container. So remember, the first quadrant is the idealists, and they are conservative. They fit their environment. They try not to shake things up too much. They like the order, although they sometimes pretend that they don't, but they ultimately do. So we got hot and wet, and then the water was cold and wet. So cold and wet is the guardians. It's water is cold just by feeling it. It's usually cold, and it's wet in that it adheres to its container. So what I mean by adheres to its container, think of air. Air fits the container that it's in. In this room, the air is adhering to the walls, and it's not breaking through walls. It's sticking. It's filling the container. Same thing with water. Water, if you put it in a glass, it adheres to its container. Now, earth is cold and dry. So by dry, now it's an individual. It doesn't adhere to its container. It stays together, and it's cold. So this would be the stereotypical artisan. He's an individual, but he's also, he has the sensory part, the cold part. Then you have I can explain this better, but I'd have to explain this model better in order to do it. And then the fire would be hot and dry. So the intuitive would be the hot part, the weird part. But then the dry part is an individual. It's an individual. It doesn't adhere to its container. And then we have the ether. He says that it's all of these qualities put together in one. So it's kind of like the God one, he said. Then Plato also said, or he also discovered 5 platonic solids, and there is only 5 platonic solids. And these are perfect polyhedrons. One is the tetrahedron, which is made up of triangles. The other one is the octahedron. The other one is the icosahedron, and these are all made of triangles. The tetrahedron has 4 triangles. The octahedron has 8 triangles, and the icosahedron has 20 triangles. And once again, these are all there's a formula that can predict all of these triangles. I think it's called Euler's formula. But basically what I'm getting at is they are all connected. They're different, but they're all connected. And I could explain it more, but I have to start studying it better. But so then we have the icosahedron, and then we have the cube, which is made up of 6 squares. So it's different than these ones. And interestingly, if you break apart a cube, you'll get a cross. So it'll look like this. You'll have a square, square, a square, a square, a square, and a square. You'll get a cross, the 4th one. And then the 5th one is what Plato said was the God one, and that's the dodecahedron. He said that this one represented God. And that has 12 faces, and I think they're pentagons. And interestingly, scientists think that, and there's a lot of evidence to indicate it, that our universe is a dodecahedron. Dodecahedron is kind of like a soccer ball. That reminded me. Think about baseball. Baseball has the 4 bases. And this is the American pastime. And then you got the basketball court. The basketball court kind of looks like a cross. You got this thing, and then the full court. But there's the, goes to the full court, and then here's the cross here. The tennis court, you got the quadrant. Even the games we play reflect the quadrant. There's cultures in Africa that would have these sticks and stuff, and they would have 16 sticks, and all the games that the people would play would be based on the quadrant. And think about the games we play now, chess and all these things. These are all quadrant-based games. But even the games that were played by the ancient people were even more quadrant-based. It was based off of 16, sticks or 16 things like this, and then you'd have 16 things that could happen. It's all based on the quadrant. And then he also said that there were 4 temperaments that were based on the 4 humors. So I'm not going to get into it, but it's basically the same thing that's going on here. There's 4 qualities, and you can mix them up. For the humors, the first quadrant one would be melancholic. The second quadrant would be, choleric. The third quadrant, sanguine. The the fourth quadrant phlegmatic. And recently, scientists have looked back at this ancient temperament thing, and they said actually, they've studied and they try to make it into a scientific model, and they say there's actually a fifth temperament, and they say that temperament is supine, and this means, I think, face upward to God. So once again, the fifth is God. It represents godliness, or real God. Phlegmatic would be so this would be the idealist, guardian. The sanguine would be the artisan. Phlegmatic would be the rational. And then there's the supine, the transcendent one. And they said that this was based on what they said were the 4 humors in the body. There was black bile, yellow bile, so we have the duality once again. We have blood, which was based on sanguine temperament. If you had too much blood, then you are a sanguine person. And then there was phlegm. If you have too much phlegm, then you're a phlegmatic person. So this is ancient philosophy, this is ancient science, but this is what the philosophers would say. Kant, when he looked at this model, he said, Kant almost came up with the theory of everything, because this is what Kant said. He said, phlegmatic, the fourth one, doesn't seem to belong. He said the other temperaments seem to be real temperaments, but he said the phlegmatic temperament, it's almost like a non-temperament. He said it doesn't fit with the other 3. So he almost was getting at the theory of everything. The fourth doesn't seem to belong, but it encompasses the other ones. Alright, so hopefully continue more in a little bit.